December 18th, 1944, 0547 hours. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. The fog hung like wet wool over the snow-covered pines. Frozen breath clouded the air in short, desperate bursts. In the half-light before dawn, the earth itself seemed to tremble a low, grinding rumble that grew louder with each passing second. Through the mist, they came, dark shapes, angular and monstrous, their long barrels sweeping the tree line like the snouts of prehistoric beasts, Panther tanks. 5 tons of sloped armor and a 75mm gun that could punch through American steel at 1,000 yards. They moved in a staggered line, their engines growling, their tracks chewing through snow and frozen mud. Behind them, shadows moved Panzer grenadiers in winter camouflage, rifles at the ready, their faces hard and lean from weeks of retreat and counterattack. Crouched in a shallow depression beside a shattered farmhouse, Private First Class Harold Mitchell pressed himself against the frozen earth. His M1 Garand lay beside him, useless against what was coming. In his hands, he gripped something far more desperate, an M9A, one bazooka, a tube of stamped steel and optimism, loaded with a single 2.36-inch rocket. His breath came in shallow gasps. His fingers, numb despite the wool gloves, fumbled with the arming pin. Around him, what remained of his squad, 8 men that morning, now just 4, watched the approaching armor with the blank, exhausted stare of men who had already written their own obituaries. This was the 3rd day of what would later be called the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West. The German offensive had crashed into the thinly held American lines with a fury that stunned even the most battle-hardened veterans. Entire divisions had been overrun, roads choked with burning vehicles, towns swallowed by the advancing tide. And now, in this forgotten corner of the Ardennes, 6 Panther tanks were rolling toward a crossroads that, if taken, would open a corridor straight to the Meuse River. Between them and that river stood Harold Mitchell, 23 years old, from a farm outside Terre Haute, Indiana, holding a weapon most men considered barely effective against the armor now bearing down on him. What happened in the next 9 minutes would become legend, but to understand it, one must first understand what the bazooka was and what it was never meant to be. The M1 Bazooka was born out of necessity and improvisation, much like the American war effort itself. Developed in 1942 by a team led by Colonel Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Oule, it was a response to the sudden, horrifying realization that American infantrymen had no portable weapon capable of stopping German armor. The weapon was crude by design. A 5-foot tube, open at both ends, firing a rocket-propelled shaped charge. Its name came from a musical instrument played by radio comedian Bob Burns, a joke that stuck, much to the chagrin of ordnance officers who preferred more dignified nomenclature. By 1944, the bazooka had been upgraded to the M9A1 model. It was lighter, more reliable, and its rockets carried a larger warhead. On paper, it could penetrate up to 4 inches of armor at optimal range and angle. In practice, it was a weapon of desperation. The shaped charge worked through a focused jet of superheated gas and molten metal, but only if it struck at the right angle, at the right distance, against the right part of the tank. Against the frontal armor of a Panther, nearly 5 inches of sloped steel designed specifically to deflect such projectiles, it was, by most tactical assessments, suicide to even try. American doctrine was clear. Bazookas were to be used from ambush positions against the thinner side or rear armor of enemy tanks, preferably from no more than 100 yards. Engaging a Panther head-on was not just discouraged. It was considered a waste of ammunition and life. The training manuals were explicit. The after-action reports were full of cautionary tales. And yet, on that frozen morning in December, Harold Mitchell would break every rule he had been taught. He had not volunteered for this. No one volunteers to stand in front of a Panther with a bazooka. His squad had been retreating for 2 days, falling back through the snow-choked forests, leaving behind equipment, wounded, and hope. They had been part of the 28th Infantry Division, a unit that had been ground down to half strength in the Hurtgen forest and sent to the Ardennes to rest and refit. Rest. The word now seemed obscene. When the German offensive smashed into their lines, the 28th had been scattered like leaves in a storm. Mitchell's platoon had been ordered to hold a crossroads near the village of Rocherath. The name meant nothing to him then. It would mean everything later. The crossroads controlled access to a narrow valley that led west, toward the supply depots and fuel dumps the Germans so desperately needed. If the Panthers broke through here, the entire northern shoulder of the Bulge would collapse. Mitchell knew this not because anyone had told him, but because he could see the desperation in his lieutenant's eyes when the order came down. Hold until relieved. Relieved. By whom? The nearest reinforcements were miles away, and the roads were clogged with retreating infantry and burning trucks. There would be no relief. There would only be the cold, the fog, and the sound of tank engines growing louder. Mitchell had fired a bazooka before, in training and twice in combat, once against a German half-track near Ardennes, once against a fortified farmhouse in the Hurtgen. Both times, he had fired from cover, from the side, at stationary targets. Both times, his loader had been a burly corporal from Pittsburgh named Eddie Kowalski, a man who could reload the tube in under 10 seconds, even under fire. Eddie was dead now, blown apart by an artillery shell 2 days ago. The man crouched beside Mitchell now was a replacement, a pale kid from New Jersey whose name Mitchell hadn't bothered to learn. The kid's hands shook as he fumbled with a spare rocket. The first Panther was less than 200 yards away now. Mitchell could see the commander's hatch, closed tight against the cold. He could see the camouflage paint, the mud caked on the tracks, the way the barrel moved slowly, methodically, searching. Behind it, the second and third Panthers fanned out, covering each other's flanks, textbook tactics. The Germans knew what they were doing. They always did. Mitchell raised the bazooka to his shoulder. The weight of it, normally reassuring, now felt like an anchor dragging him toward the earth. His mind raced through the calculations he had been taught. Range, angle, point of aim. At 200 yards, the rocket would begin to lose velocity. At this angle, the sloped frontal armor would deflect anything short of a perfect hit. The odds of penetration were less than 1 in 10. The odds of survival after revealing his position were 0. And then, through the fog and the fear, a memory surfaced. Not from training, not from any manual, but from his childhood on the farm. His father, teaching him to shoot rabbits with a .22 rifle. You can't outthink a rabbit, son. They're too fast, too clever. So you don't aim where they are. You aim where they're going to be, and you make them come to you. Mitchell lowered the bazooka. His loader stared at him, uncomprehending. What are you doing? The kid hissed. Mitchell didn't answer. He was watching the lead Panther, tracking its movement, reading the terrain. The tank was following the road, the path of least resistance through the snow. In 30 seconds, it would reach a slight depression where the road dipped down before rising again. For just a moment, the tank would be angled slightly upward, exposing the thinner belly armor and the lower glacis plate, the junction between the hull and the chassis. A weak point. Not much of one, but the only one Mitchell was going to get. He waited. 10 seconds. The Panther's engine roared as it climbed a small rise. 5 seconds. The barrel swung toward the farmhouse, toward him. 2 seconds. Mitchell squeezed the trigger. The bazooka erupted with a crack and a whoosh, the rocket screaming out of the tube in a trail of white smoke. The backblast tore through the frozen air behind him, kicking up snow and dirt. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. The rocket traced a flat arc through the fog, spinning slightly, its stabilizing fins cutting through the air. Mitchell didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He watched. The rocket struck the Panther low, just above the right track, where the hull met the chassis. There was a flash, not the bright orange of a penetration, but a sharp, white spark. Mitchell's heart sank. A deflection. A waste. And then the Panther lurched. Its engine coughed, belched black smoke, and died. The tank coasted forward a few more feet and stopped, dead in the road. Through the fog, Mitchell could hear shouting in German. The commander's hatch popped open, A figure emerged, silhouetted against the grey sky. Mitchell didn't hesitate. "Reload!" he barked. The kid from New Jersey stared at the smoking tube, at the dead Panther, at Mitchell. You hit it. You killed it. I got lucky. Now reload before his friends figure out where we are." The kid fumbled with the second rocket, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Mitchell grabbed it from him, slammed it into the tube and twisted the contact wire into place. 7 seconds. Too slow. The other Panthers were moving now, engines revving, trying to maneuver around their stricken leader. Mitchell shifted his aim to the second Panther, the one swinging wide to the left. It was moving faster now, trying to flank. Bad move. The tank had to turn sharply to avoid a cluster of trees, and in doing so it exposed its side. Not the rear, still too much armor, but the side where the hull met the turret. Another weak point. Another impossible shot. Mitchell fired. This time the rocket struck true. The shaped charge detonated against the side armor with a sharp crack, punching through the steel and into the fighting compartment. A moment later, the Panther's ammunition cooked off. The turret lifted into the air on a pillar of orange flame, flipped lazily, and crashed back down onto the hull. The tank burned, black smoke boiling into the sky. 2 down. The remaining Panthers scattered, their commanders now fully aware that something was very wrong. One reversed, trying to back out of the kill zone. Another pivoted hard right, turret swinging, searching for the source of the fire. The 4th and 5th Panthers spread out, using the terrain for cover. The 6th, the largest of the group, stopped and began firing blind into the tree line, its machine gun chattering, tracers arcing through the fog. Mitchell was already moving. He grabbed the bazooka, yelled for his loader to follow, and sprinted 20 yards to the left, to a new position behind a low stone wall. The Panzer Grenadiers were advancing now, using the chaos for cover. Rifle rounds cracked past Mitchell's head. Somewhere behind him, one of his squad mates opened up with a BRR, the heavy slugs tearing into the German infantry. Men screamed, the fog filled with smoke and noise and death. Mitchell set up again, bracing the bazooka on the stone wall. His loader slid in beside him, gasping, clutching 2 more rockets. "How many you got left?" Mitchell demanded. 4, 5 if you count the dud. Don't count the dud. The 3rd Panther was reversing, its engine whining, tracks churning through the snow. It was trying to back into the cover of the tree line, to regroup. Mitchell tracked it, waiting for the angle. Rear armor. That was the textbook shot. That was what he had been trained for. The Panther's rear plate was only 40 millimeters, barely enough to stop a determined infantryman with a satchel charge, let alone a bazooka rocket. But the Panther wasn't giving him a clean shot. It was reversing at an angle, presenting its flank, its turret still swiveling, still searching. Mitchell adjusted his aim, leading the target, calculating the speed, the distance, the angle of impact. He fired. The rocket hit the Panther in the turret ring, the rotating joint where the turret met the hull. It was a 1 in 1,000 shot, a shot that shouldn't have been possible. The explosion was small, almost disappointing, but the turret jammed, locked in place, unable to traverse. The tank was now blind on one side, crippled. The commander, realizing his predicament, bailed out. The crew followed, stumbling into the snow, hands raised. Mitchell's squadmates cut them down before they had taken 3 steps. There was no mercy here, no time for prisoners. 3 down. Mitchell reloaded. His hands were shaking now, not from fear but from adrenaline and cold. His fingers felt like blocks of wood. The loader, the kid from New Jersey, was crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears streaming down his face as he worked, as he loaded, as he followed orders. The 4th Panther was closing in, its commander more aggressive, more reckless. It had seen where the last shot came from, and was driving straight toward Mitchell's position, machine gun blazing. Rounds smacked into the stone wall, chipping away chunks of frozen masonry. Mitchell ducked, pressed himself flat. The tank was 100 yards away now. 50, too close, far too close. Mitchell stood up, exposed himself fully, and aimed not at the tank but at the ground in front of it. He fired. The rocket hit the snow and exploded, kicking up a shower of dirt and ice. The Panther drove through it, unharmed but blinded. For just a second, the driver couldn't see, and he veered left, turning the tank slightly, exposing the side. Mitchell's loader had already reloaded, moving on pure instinct. Mitchell grabbed the bazooka, aimed and fired again. The rocket struck the Panther's side, punching through the armor and detonating inside. The tank didn't explode. It simply stopped, smoke pouring from the hatches. No one got out. 4 down. The 5th and 6th Panthers were retreating now, engines roaring, tracks throwing up plumes of snow. They had had enough, but Mitchell hadn't. He chased them, running through the snow, the bazooka on his shoulder, his loader stumbling after him. The other members of his squad thought he had lost his mind. Perhaps he had. The 5th Panther was moving fast, heading for the tree line. Mitchell stopped, knelt, and fired without aiming, without thinking. The rocket flew wide, missing by 10 feet, detonating harmlessly against a tree. The loader reloaded. Mitchell fired again. This time the rocket struck the Panther's rear, the sweet spot, the place every Bazooka team dreamed of hitting. The explosion tore through the engine compartment. Flames erupted, engulfing the tank. The crew bailed out, their uniforms on fire, rolling in the snow. Mitchell's squadmates finished them, 5 down. The 6th Panther, the last one, had reached the tree line. It was almost safe, almost gone. Mitchell had 1 rocket left. His loader held it up, hands trembling. "Last one," the kid said, his voice barely a whisper. Mitchell took it, loaded it himself. The Panther was 300 yards away now, moving fast, weaving between the trees. An impossible shot, a waste of ammunition. Mitchell raised the bazooka, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The rocket flew in a high arc, almost lazy, spinning through the fog. It should have missed. By every law of physics and probability, it should have missed, but it didn't. It struck the Panther on the top of the turret, the thinnest armor, a place no one ever aimed for, because no one could ever hit it. The shaped charge punched through, detonating inside. The Panther coasted forward another 20 feet, smashed into a tree, and stopped. Smoke poured from every hatch. No one emerged. 6 down. 9 minutes had passed since the first shot. In the days that followed, as the Battle of the Bulge raged on, Harold Mitchell's actions at the Rocherath crossroads became the subject of intense scrutiny. His battalion commander recommended him for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was downgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross, then to a Silver Star, not because anyone doubted his courage, but because the sheer improbability of what he had done made it difficult to corroborate. 6 Panthers destroyed by a single bazooka team in 9 minutes was by any standard statistically absurd. Some officers suspected the reports had been exaggerated, others believed Mitchell had been extraordinarily lucky. A few thought he was simply reckless, that his methods were unsound, and that his survival was a fluke that should not be emulated. But the men who had been there, the ones who had watched him move from position to position, firing and reloading with a cold, mechanical precision, knew better. They had seen something that day that they couldn't quite put into words, a man who had looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept the premise of impossibility. Mitchell had not been lucky. He had been deliberate. Every shot had been calculated, every angle measured, every risk weighed and accepted. He had not fought the Panthers the way he had been trained to fight them. He had fought them the way they could be beaten, by exploiting not their armor, but their assumptions. German tank crews in 1944 were among the most experienced and highly trained in the world. They knew their vehicles, knew their strengths, knew their weaknesses. They knew that American bazookas were dangerous at close range, against side and rear armor, from ambush. They did not expect to be engaged frontally. They did not expect an American infantryman to stand in the open, in the fog, and fire at their glacis plates. It was not in the doctrine. It was not rational. Harold Mitchell had not been rational. He had been something else entirely, a man who understood that survival did not come from following rules, but from making the enemy follow theirs. By attacking frontally, by taking shots that should not have worked, he had forced the Panthers to react, to maneuver, to expose themselves. He had turned their strength, their armor, into a liability, because armor only matters if you can control where the enemy shoots. The bazooka Mitchell had used that day was later recovered and examined by ordnance officers. It was a standard M9A1, manufactured in 1943, with no modifications or special characteristics. The rockets were standard issue. The weapon had not been enchanted. The man behind it had simply understood something that most soldiers never learned, that a weapon is only as effective as the mind wielding it, and that doctrine is a guide, not a gospel. In the years after the war, Harold Mitchell returned to his farm in Indiana. He did not speak often about what had happened in the Ardennes. When pressed, he would say only that he had done what needed to be done, and that he had been fortunate to survive. He did not consider himself a hero. He considered himself a farmer who had been interrupted by history and who had done his best to get back to the work he knew and loved, but others did not forget. The story of the 6 Panthers spread through the ranks, passed from unit to unit, embellished and mythologized. Bazooka teams across Europe began to adopt Mitchell's tactics, not officially, but quietly, in the field, where doctrine was written not in manuals but in blood and experience. They learned to aim for weak points they had been taught to ignore. They learned to take risks they had been trained to avoid. They learned that the impossible was only impossible until someone did it. The bazooka itself became a symbol, not of American industrial might or technological superiority, but of something more fundamental, adaptability. It was a crude weapon, simple and unglamorous, but in the hands of men willing to think, willing to improvise, it became something far more dangerous than its specifications suggested. It became a tool of agency, a means by which an individual soldier could challenge and defeat the mechanized leviathans of the Wehrmacht. This was perhaps the deepest ideological wound the Allies inflicted on the Axis. Germany and Japan had built their war machines on the premise of collective strength, of discipline, of hierarchy, of the superiority of the state over the individual. Their tanks, their aircraft, their armies were instruments of that philosophy, designed to crush through sheer mass and coordination.
But time and again they found themselves undone not by superior equipment or greater numbers, but by the unpredictable initiative of individual soldiers, men like Harold Mitchell, who refused to die simply because the odds said they should. The American soldier in World War II was not inherently superior. He was often less experienced, less disciplined, less ideologically motivated than his German or Japanese counterpart. But he had one overwhelming advantage. He had been raised in a society that, for all its flaws, valued individual initiative and rewarded problem-solving. He did not fight because he had been ordered to believe in the righteousness of the state. He fought because he believed in the possibility of going home, of building a life, of making choices, and that belief made him dangerous in ways that no amount of armor or firepower could counter. On the morning of December 19, 1944, as the sun finally broke through the fog over the Ardennes, Harold Mitchell sat in a frozen foxhole and ate a bar of Hershey's chocolate. It was hard as a rock, tasteless, little more than compressed sugar and cocoa. He gnawed on it slowly, letting it dissolve on his tongue. Around him, the snow was trampled and scorched. The hulks of 6 Panther tanks smoldered in the early light, their steel twisted and blackened, their crews buried under tarps or scattered in the drifts. The kid from New Jersey sat beside him, silent, staring at the chocolate bar in Mitchell's hand. Mitchell broke off a piece and handed it to him. The kid took it without a word, bit into it, winced at the hardness and chewed. "Tastes like shit," the kid said finally. Mitchell nodded. "Yeah." They sat in silence, watching the smoke rise. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. The war was not over. It would not be over for months. But for now, in this moment, there was only the cold, the smoke, and the bitter sweetness of cheap chocolate. Mitchell looked at the bazooka lying in the snow beside him. It was scratched, dented, the paint scorched from the barrel. It looked like what it was, a piece of stamped steel, mass-produced, unremarkable. But it had done its job, and so had he. He thought about the Panthers, about the men inside them, about the fact that they had probably been somebody's sons or brothers, that they had probably believed they were fighting for something worth dying for. He did not hate them. He did not even feel proud of what he had done. He felt only a profound exhaustion, a weariness that went deeper than bone. But he also felt something else, something he couldn't quite name. It was the knowledge that he had faced the worst the enemy could throw at him, and had not broken, that he had taken a weapon the experts said wouldn't work and made it work, that he had stood in front of a Panther tank and lived. That was what democracy looked like, he thought. Not speeches or flags or grand ideals, just a man with a piece of steel and a choice to run or to fight, to follow the rules or to break them, to accept what he was told was impossible or to prove it wrong. He finished the chocolate, crumpled the wrapper, and shoved it into his pocket. The kid from New Jersey did the same. They sat there, 2 men in a frozen hole, surrounded by the wreckage of empire, chewing on sweetness and silence, and somewhere, in the distance, the next wave of tanks began to move,